Okay, give me a second here. Welcome to American Foo Fighters, everybody. We're a new show. We've got a lot to cover, and we have a very special guest on the show today. Military aerospace historian. You've seen him on Hangar One, UFO Hunters, and Ancient Aliens, Mr. Michael Schratt, all the way from California.
Good to be with you.
Man, we've got a lot to talk about today.
Right.
I'm very excited about what you're about to present here because this information is important. I know you've been doing this since around 1994.
That is correct.
Yeah,
that is correct.
You've even been publishing articles. You've been getting stuff in magazines, but more importantly, you've been bringing the history and keeping it together for us, so us new generation, the younger kids, can understand that all that we're about to hear about is fact and concrete.
Oh, we definitely want to back up our sources with paperwork, documentation, military witness testimony. So it's not like we're just making these stories up. These are actual authenticated accounts from the military witnesses.
Yeah, because
Right.
all this is leading somewhere.
Correct. That's
all,
correct.
All this is going somewhere. And I know you just recently did an interview with Richard Dolan. I saw that on YouTube, and that
Right.
was fantastic. I thought what you two talked about, and I've heard some. I know a lot of stuff, not like you, but some of the things that you had talked about with Richard was just fascinating to hear. So what are we doing today, Michael? What do we got?
are going to be considering 5 UFO crash retrieval cases. I want to give you the names, the dates, the locations, the reference material, the paperwork, the reference books, so that you can verify this on your own. I don't want you to just take it at face value. I invite people to be skeptical, to do their own investigation, see if this checks out with what they found out with their investigation. That's the goal here. That's the goal.
Absolutely. All right, well, great. With all that, let's get started. Let's see what you got.
Okay, so the title of and this will be a multi-part series, absolutely. We're never going to cover everything in one thing because we've got enough information to make it to the next ice age, really. So we got plenty of reference material. But this segment is Retrievals of the Third Kind, Part 1, and Cosmic Crashes, Corpses, and Cover-Ups. That's the subtitle here. And I want to move on to the next slide so that people understand where I'm getting a vast majority of this information. Comes from this book, UFO Crash Retrievals, The Complete Investigation, all of Leonard Stringfield's status reports. Leonard Stringfield is the gentleman who coined the term UFO crash retrieval. And over a period of 3 decades, he compiled first-hand military sources of people who saw the bodies, the pathologist reports, the x-rays, people who handled the debris, people who manhandled craft onto the back of 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks and shipped them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's the caliber of witnesses that Leonard had identified. So he put all this information together. He wrote about 7 status reports. All those were compiled into one volume, and that's what this is right here. So I want to highlight this.
So what do you know about Leonard's background? Like, how does he get involved in this? Why is this important to him?
Leonard joined the military as soon as he heard about Pearl Harbor.
He was military.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And he had his own Foo Fighter sighting in a C-47, and it changed his life.
Okay.
Because both engines went out. They thought they were going to lose the plane and everybody. But when these things flew away, engines went back on. They landed safely. But that affected his life because he had a close Foo Fighter right outside the window of the C-47. And that's what kind of got him interested. And he just started piecing this story together. And I really want to give credit to this guy because, you know, he's long since gone now. He passed away in '94. But we've got to continue with his legacy because personally, I feel he got closer than anyone has ever gotten before because he really did interview these first-hand military witnesses. He vetted their backgrounds. He got closer than anybody. So I think it's important that we consider his research.
And when you say he got closer, there's a real specific meaning to that. He was almost through the door.
Basically, yes.
To what we all are trying to get through right now.
The cosmic Watergate. He got closer to unraveling the cosmic Watergate than just about anyone in this field because he talked to the people who had firsthand knowledge of it, people who loaded up the bodies, people who shipped these things to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Edwards North Base Complex, Homestead Air Force Base, MacDill Air Force Base, Eglin Air Force Base. There's multiple locations around the country where they diversify their portfolio. They're never going to put everything in one location. It's too risky because we're talking about the crown jewels here. You want to have all of these assets spread out. So if there's any accident, you don't lose all your assets. They've got to do that. And they've got warehouses where they've got gun camera footage. They've got 8x10 glossy black and white. They've got 8x10 color motion picture film reel footage of these crash retrievals. That is the kind of evidence that we need to push this field forward, because senators and congressmen, number one, they don't have a need to know, and number two, they're not cleared to get access to this information. And so what that means is, by default, it falls upon us to track down these legacy witnesses to preserve an important part of our national history.
Oh, fantastic. So let's keep moving
Okay, let's
forward
continue on here.
Very
So
exciting.
we're going to start with this retrieval operation here. So this is right around April 20th, 1941. This is Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And this is MUFON Journal number 403, November 2001. Two primary people involved in this case, Charlotte Mann and Reverend William Hoffman. We'll get into him. Now, bottom line is, and we also want to highlight Paul Blake Smith and his work. So he's done a really good job. This is MO41, that stands for Missouri 1941, the bombshell before Roswell. So we're 6 years before Roswell. Many think that Roswell was the origin of crash retrievals. No, it's not. We've got multiple crash retrieval cases, and we know that from Leonard's work that predate Roswell by 5-6 years. So it's something we should consider.
Well, there's a couple other big things that happened in 1941. There's the sinking of the Bismarck. Bob Hope does his first USO open for people. And oddly enough, if you look up in history, we know about this stuff.
Right.
But they don't put it in the top 10 things that happen. Why is that?
Because when you talk about UFO crash retrievals, you're talking about the crown jewels. You're talking about the trump card technology. You're talking about ace in the hole technology. When you hear these terms, now we're on a completely different wavelength here. This isn't anything that they would publish in the local newspaper. And we know that because during World War II, the subject of UFOs was classified higher than the atomic bomb. So we're really talking about the varsity team here.
Goodness gracious. Above.
Yes.
Above.
It was classified above top secret, above the atomic bomb.
That's pretty amazing.
They spent more on reverse engineering the technology associated with these vehicles so that they can get the weapons advancement and the free energy propulsion system than they ever spent on the atomic bomb program. That's why this was classified higher than the atomic bomb.
Interesting. All right, let's move forward here.
All right, so it's 1941, April 20th. Reverend Hoffman gets a knock on the door. It's about 9:30 p.m. He opens up the door. There's two police officers there. And they said, Reverend, we believe we have an unknown aircraft crash and we'd like your assistance. Can you help us? So he climbs into the squad car. They go across town about 15 miles. They get to an open field. There's farm people there. The military didn't get there quite yet, so it's early on in this retrieval operation. And then when he gets to where this craft came down, he saw approximately a 25-foot diameter disc-shaped craft. Came in about a 40-degree angle. There was a hull breach on the side of the craft where you could look inside the craft, showing you control panel buttons and switches. There were chairs in there. There were 3 ET bodies laying outside the craft. 2 had already deceased. 1 was still alive. And so what you see in this illustration by Tom Bogan is kind of the beginning part of this retrieval operation. So I'm going to go on to the next slide here, and you can see he got to this final survivor 60 seconds before it passed away. So Reverend William Hoffman got there just in time before this ET body passed away.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And is that just his statement, or is this witnessed by multiple people?
This is his statement.
Okay.
When he came back that night, he was a changed man. He brought all his family together and he said, I'm going to say this one time and one time only. And when I'm done, I'm never going to talk about it again. And that's exactly what he did.
So Reverend Hoffman is able to witness something that's extraordinary.
Absolutely.
It's his eyes only. It's his words only. Brings it back to his family and
Correct.
says, that's it. I'm just going to talk about this. That's an incredible moment. I find it interesting that the police are at his house. They bring him to this location because they want to give last rites.
They didn't know what they were dealing with here. They thought this might have just been some kind of aircraft. They didn't know what they were dealing with here. This is early on in these crash retrieval operations.
So, but it's very detailed. We know how big the craft is. Where does that information come from? Is that from Hoffman himself?
It's in the report at the very first slide. It's in the report.
Okay.
They give you the dimensions, the interior components, what he saw inside. And now, while all this is going on, within this field of debris near the craft, there were farm people there. There were newspaper photographers. They were going around snapping shots of the craft, of the debris, and the bodies.
Now,
I mean, can you believe it? This
Yeah,
is what was going on.
Now, in history, do we have any of that? Have we ever been able to find it?
Well, that's the $65 million question. Where did all this go? You know, because when the military gets involved, they swear everybody to secrecy. They take the evidence, and that's what they've done here. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And as you can see, here's Charlotte Mann. And what she was told is basically they took this last corpse and they picked it up under its armpits. They had one farm person on this side, another one on this side. They outstretched its arms, and then one of these newspaper photographers actually take a snapshot. He took a photograph of this. This was given to the Reverend about 2 weeks later. It was handed down through the family. Charlotte Mann held this photograph in her hand. She saw this on multiple occasions. And then there was a quote-unquote photographic analysis expert that came to the house who wanted to see this photograph. And you know what happened. It disappeared and it's gone. So we were this close of seeing this actual photograph. And you can see this sketch here based on Charlotte's memory. And so I thought, let's see, what can we do? Can we make a replica based on the sketch, based on Charlotte's memory of seeing this? And what we came up with is this photograph right here. Wow. Something like this existed back in '41.
Wow.
It'd be decades old, coffee stained, scalloped edges, ripped, stained, might be burnt. Something like this was taken from the family not too long after this event. And it disappeared forever. So again, we were this close to getting this kind of evidence.
Wow, and that's big in the 40s, early 40s.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, so we're going to continue on here. So space, the final frontier. What NASA doesn't want you to know. Clark McClellan. This is the reference material for this additional case that we'll talk about here. Now, in this particular crash retrieval operation, this craft came from a railroad flat car from Arkansas. And you can see the drawing here. This thing
And what year is this?
This is 1946,
Okay.
November 1946. 15 feet in diameter, about 7 feet tall. It had a series of rectangular windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. Seamless, chrome polished aluminum exterior. Basically no weld marks, no socket head cap screws, no hex head cap screws, no bolts, no fasteners of any kind. This thing was like antiseptically sterile and arrived at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio back in 1946.
So you have been involved with aircrafts. You understand all this. At that time, that is pretty amazing.
Well, think about what we had. The F-86 was just coming online at that time.
Yep.
And here we have something. Yeah, here we have something that has no visible means of propulsion. There's no rockets, there's no jets, there's no wings, there's no flight controls, there's no tail, no rudder. This craft is something completely different than any, no rivets, no visible means of propulsion. It was antiseptically sterile on the inside. There were no seats, nothing. It was completely like one continuous unit here. I'm going to go on to the next slide, and now you can see my AutoCAD drawing that gives you a real good idea of what this thing looks like.
Wow.
And if you see the upper right, I've peeled back the skin showing the interior central column. This thing was about 3 feet in diameter and went from the bottom of the craft through the center midsection and then all the way to the top. Now, I want to mention one thing that's very important. If you look on the window to the left of center, what you'll see is a small red dot. That is the attempted point of entry where white lab coat technicians were using a diamond tip drill bit to pierce the hole of this, and they couldn't get in. They couldn't get in. I've got 3 other cases within my files of these lab coat technicians desperately trying to pierce the hull of these craft, and they can't do it.
Interesting. And do we have any technology today that would replicate that kind of window? Anything like that?
Well, you would think that after all these years and all this money that's been spent, because we know that within the black world, the military-industrial complex, during the Clinton administration, we were spending $100 million a day on black programs. This is the most deepest black program of all. We know that a lot of money was filtered off it, and the only thing that I know of the different ways that they try to breach the hull of these craft is, number one, they try a diamond tip drill bit.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, they go to acetylene torches. If that doesn't work, they go to lasers. The final operation is to dip the entire craft into a vat of liquid nitrogen, cool shock it, and then get in that way.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, that's where we probably got bulletproof windows today for like the president's car and people like that.
You would think about the material science that they learn from this craft, other vehicles. If we could integrate that technology into our 5th and 6th generation stealth fighter, we'd be ruling the world, and we are. It's clear that's what they've done. That's what they've done.
What is your thought about how did they get into the ship then if there was no doors or anything? What are your thoughts on that?
We don't know if this was a manned craft. This could have been a drone for all we know. Because this thing was antiseptically sterile inside. There were no seats, no display panels, but this thing was brought in on a railroad car, 46 time frame. This is before Wright-Patterson Air Force Base actually existed, because it didn't become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until October 1947. Prior to that, it was known as Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's continue on. This was my very first past illustration, just to give an idea of what this craft may have looked like.
Wow,
kind of like this silver polished exterior, very smooth on the exterior. You've got the windows wrapped around the outer circumference. You've got that flat section in the middle. And then this is Joseph Race rendering, which is much better than mine, starting to really make this thing come alive now.
Sure.
And this, as we go through these cases, and as we go through the different segments of all these different crash retrievals, you can see that the body count keeps going up, the craft count keeps going up. These things are sent to multiple locations around the country, and it is the biggest secret. You can see why they would want to keep this even more secret than the atomic bomb program.
It would shock people at that time. They wouldn't know what to think.
Well, we were just out of World War II, and at that time, the greatest generation, when the military said something, people agreed with it.
Okay.
But now that we're so far down the line and there's been questioning the government now, we're skeptical. We want to challenge what the government says. It is our constitutional obligation to question authority. Now more than ever, we should be doing that, because we as taxpayers, we are paying for the reverse engineering of these craft, the material science, everything they've learned. It's been filtered into the defense industry. It's made it proprietary, because a lot of this is no longer classified. It's proprietary. So in some cases, we can't even get to it, because when the defense contractor spends its own internal money, it becomes proprietary at that point.
As I look at these renderings, which are fabulous, thanks for doing all this. If you turn that ship sideways, it looks like Thimble, the latest
It does.
video of,
Sure.
that they saw. I think it was a 2001 Nemesis. Is that the video that's the big hoop hop?
I believe that's the 2004 USS Nimitz encounter with the F-18. Yep.
Okay.
So we'll move on now. This is drawing by Rudy. Now, this was a private and records management. That's the source for this. And he had a friend who worked at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. And when he was delivering this letter to one of the military brass, he was met by his friend who was the MP. And this friend said, "You know what? I got something I want to show you. Why don't you come follow me?" So he brings him into the back of the hangar. This thing is sitting on the hangar floor. And he's astounded because there was a tarp covered up and folded off to the right of the craft. In the foreground, there was an open toolbox with an electric drill and a diamond tip drill. And so what they were doing is they were changing shift, and he got there at the right place at the right time and got to see this. They walked around this thing for 10 minutes, and then they got out of there. But this is what one of these military witnesses are telling us here. And this is Joseph Race full color rendering, what we put together based on the original military witness.
Wow. Can you imagine walking in and seeing that?
Oh, I know. And this isn't the only time craft have been seen at Wright-Patterson. It really appears that in the, let's say, mid-1940s, 50s, and 60s, going into the early 1970s, all roads appear to lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for a number of reasons. Number one, they had the Foreign Technology Division there. They had the Aeromedical Lab there. So not only could they test the tensile strength of these craft, they could do the autopsies on the ET bodies. So that's why all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during those years.
Amazing, just amazing. That's a great illustration. That is fantastic. I've never seen that before. Well done, well done.
Yep. All right, we'll continue on here. So who would have a need to know? The phenomenon is something real, not imaginary or fictitious. General Nathan F. Twining, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base commander, he would need to know. So if there's one person that at least knew what was going on to a certain degree, it would have been Nathan Twining. So that's one person that we can check off in our box.
And he publicly said something.
Oh, this is a direct quote from him. This is a direct quote from him. So if you have friends or family members that are sitting on the fence, they're skeptical, you can point them to this gentleman right here. And we've got a credible military personnel talking about that this is something real. This is not just science fiction. It's actually going on.
Just incredible, just incredible. Okay.
Yep, we'll continue on here. Now, I want to do kind of a tour of Roswell here. Because, you know, what discussion about UFO crash retrievals would be complete if we didn't talk about Roswell? Sure. And I want to just mention that this is something that anyone can do. You can book a flight to the Air Center, which is in Roswell, direct. You don't even have to connect. And just rent a car, and you can go down all of these areas. There's a new book that came out by Noe Torres that gives you the GPS coordinates of where this went down, the different places. Jesse Marcel Jr., where the debris was handed out onto the kitchen table. It shows you all these locations. And you can just take this tour right down in Roswell. And we can go on to the next slide here. And this is kind of the overall map, just to give people an idea. And we're not talking about one event here. We're talking about multiple events. This is the night of July 2nd, 1947. If we look to the left of this map, there's a big blob, okay? That is the debris field. We want to start about 5 nautical miles north of the debris field, something called the touchdown site. This is where Lincoln La Paz and 509th Bomb Group member Louis Rickett, they discovered 2 things. And do you know what it is, Tony? Do you know what they are?
I have no idea.
Okay. First thing they discovered was fused green glass. That's number 1. Number 2, they discovered a small black box, the size a little bit smaller than a bread box, could not be opened for anything. I don't know today if they even opened it. But so just right off the bat, we can take the weather balloon theory that the government tried to pitch to us for all these years, and we can throw it away because weather balloons do not cause sand to become fused green glass. So right off the bat, we can take the weather balloon thing right off the bat. Totally gone. That's gone. So if we go south of the touchdown site is the debris field. This would be the morning of the 3rd, 1947. So you've got Mac Brazel and you've got 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor. They ride up on horseback and they get to this massive debris field, 200 feet wide, 3/4 of a mile long, with 3 types of debris. Number 1, small tinfoil-like debris that could not be cut, could not be burned, could not be dented with a 16-pound sledgehammer. Debris number 2 was this small type material that you could fold up and you can crumble, and then when you let go out in your hand, it spread out like liquid mercury and settled down to the table. That was debris number 2. Debris number 3 were small pieces of I-beam material with strange violet-covered hieroglyphic type writing written on the inside wall. Those are the 3 types of debris. Now, as the craft is traveling from the northwest to the southeast, the trajectory here, I've got the arrows, 2 bodies were ejected from what we believe to be a escape pod. The main craft exploded midair and showered all the debris on the Foster Ranch. As the craft is still heading southeast bound, 2 bodies were ejected from the craft. That's called the Timothy Proctor site. The actual craft landed 40 miles north of Roswell. and we've got 5 bodies were recovered and 1 was still alive.
So let me understand this correctly.
Yes.
You're saying that there's actually 2 points of impact, 2 crashes.
They're all associated with the same vehicle,
Yes.
but yes, that's
So,
correct.
And this is over 3 miles? Did I hear you correctly?
Well, where the debris field is 65 miles north of Roswell, northwest of Roswell, near Corona. But the craft trajectory was from the northwest to the southeast, so it's still traveling eastbound. It came down basically, and then 2 bodies were ejected and skipped and then finally landed at the crash site. This is
Okay.
north of Roswell.
Well, kids, that's why you want to wear your safety belts, your
Yes.
seat belts.
Right.
Obviously, they learned the hard way. Okay, so let's keep going here.
Okay.
This is interesting.
Yep. So this is the overall map that shows you kind of the layout of the whole thing, because a lot of people think that it's just the debris field. No, there's multiple locations. And that's why you can tell that the civilians got to the debris field before the military,
Okay.
because it was burning up the town back then. Okay, so let's continue. Now, if you look at this photograph, this is what the landscape looks out there. It's remote by car, but not remote by plane. And there's no, big trees or mountains. It's just this kind of low, flat, rolling hill area.
Sure.
And you could see stuff for miles if you were flying overhead. It would stand out like a sore
And
thumb.
what's our closest military Air Force base to this location?
Roswell Army Airfield,
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
right there in the backyard.
basically. But
Okay.
again, 65 mile, about 35 miles north of downtown Roswell. Okay, so let's continue on here. So here's the morning of July 3rd, 1947. You've got Mac Brazel and 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor that came across this debris field. The amount of debris and this trench that this thing augured in with the ground and then skipped up and kept heading eastbound also takes out the weather balloon theory. A weather balloon isn't going to cause this. So there's another data point that completely debunks the weather balloon theory.
Okay.
Correct. All right, so let's move on to the next one here. Now, we talked about the I-beams. This is from the Roswell Museum. We're not talking about anything large here. This thing was about 1/8 of an inch wide, 3/8 of an inch tall, and then they were various sizes, 3 inches to 6 inches large. That's how these I-beams looked. And there were these violet-colored hieroglyphic type writing written on one wall, one side of these I-beams. So in a nutshell, that's what these I-beams look like. So I thought, you know what? Let's see if we can build a replica of what these I-beams look like. So I looked at the dimensions here, went down to Home Depot, cut it to the correct length. I printed out the interior hieroglyphic lettering, and this is what I came up with. Something like this was held by Jesse Marcel Jr. when Jesse Marcel Sr. came back from the debris field, woke up his son and his wife, and said, "I've got something I got to show you." So he threw all this debris on the kitchen table, let them look through it, and young Jesse, who was only 11 years at the time, he picked up this I-beam, turned it over, and these hieroglyphic type lettering were written on the inside wall.
So, to your knowledge, Michael, have we ever been able to decipher what that's saying, or maybe where those came from? What does it mean?
That's
Do
a
we know that?
fantastic question. I don't know, and I don't know
We
if
don't know the
anyone
answer.
knows, but
But somebody found it important enough to put that on this vehicle.
absolutely, absolutely. And if you look at the other crash retrieval cases within this whole series that we're doing here, a lot of these other craft also had hieroglyphic type writing written on the exterior of the rim of the craft and on the inside wall of the upper dome. And so by default, you would think that there has to be a united coalition of engineers, linguistic experts that are trying to decipher what these symbols mean. There has to be an international coalition of linguistic type experts deciphering what this is. There has to be.
Oh, absolutely.
There has to be.
Yeah.
So this was kind of my scale model, and then I did a SolidWorks model just to give a little bit of a close-up of what these things may have looked like. Yeah.
And do we know for a fact this is what he drew on a piece of paper? We have an idea of it? Where does this come from?
This is to the best of Jesse Marcel Jr.'s recollection.
Oh,
Now, it's not perfect because this is a long time ago, and he can't remember exactly, but a best estimation, something that looks similar to this.
Very
Yes.
interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yep. Okay, we'll continue on here. Now, what happened to the debris, right? We have enough documented evidence in Ryan Wood's book, Magic Eyes Only, that has 104 crash retrieval cases in it. We can pin it down that a portion of the debris absolutely did go to Battelle Memorial Institute. They are the oldest contractor in the United States. Some of the material absolutely went there. We can prove it.
Wow, that is something else.
Yep. So I don't know if it's still there now, but back at that time, it made its way to Battelle Memorial Institute.
And this is in 1947. So Battelle is there before 1947.
Yeah, 1920.
1920. So they received this stuff, and they probably still have the Roswell, some of the Roswell crash in there.
Among other crash retrievals as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to bet that they have more than one,
And
certainly.
is that privately owned, or is that controlled by, who controls that company?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And I'm not too smart to ask that question.
Right.
but
No,
I
that's a
am
good
curious.
question. That's a
Yeah.
very good question. But bottom line is, we've got enough evidence now, enough paperwork to back it up that we know portions of the Roswell debris, probably the I-beams, probably some of the memory metal, made it to Battelle.
Ah,
Yep.
interesting.
Yep. We'll continue on here. Now, after the craft came down, this would be the night of the 2nd July 1947. So whatever biologics were out there, we're talking about the ET bodies that were deceased, were sitting out in the Roswell, just completely exposed to nature, the elements, to critters. They were decomposing the night of the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. It wasn't until the night of the 7th when the actual retrieval operation began. So that's why we know, and I don't want to get too gruesome here, but we got to make this historically accurate.
Absolutely.
We know for a fact that this was no weather balloon, because when the retrieval operation really kicked in, the disgusting, pungent stench odor from the decomposing bodies permeated all of the clothes of the 509th Bomb Group members, like their pants, everything. When they got home, their wives had to burn their clothes,
Wow.
not be washed out. So this is not a weather balloon. We're talking about something else here.
Sure.
You know, I trust these people when they tell me that they had to burn the clothes. Yeah. This sounds legit. Yeah. So this is something that went on. Now, what you're looking at here in this photograph, this illustration, gives you an idea. The Roswell craft, this is the escape pod, was 13 feet across, similar to the size of a Volkswagen. So we're not talking about something large here. It had an upper dome. This is an egg-shaped craft, 13 feet across, with a small rise upper dome. There was a hull breach on the side of the craft. When Dan Dwyer got to here, he was the fireman, he saw the survivor walking around with the military, and then he was taken away in what we believe to be an ambulance truck. Now, this craft happened within 200 yards of a water tower and a windmill, so that's why we've got this in the background. Over here, you've got an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy truck. And what's interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how did they get the craft onto the trailer? That's the next thing we want to talk about. Okay, so Jesse Marcel Jr., here's his direct quote. "It certainly wasn't anything built by us." This is the intelligence officer. You would think that he could tell the difference between something very unusual and a weather balloon. You would hope so, right?
Yeah, but
So
I also would think as that maybe the military say, this is what we want you to say. Could that take place? Is that possible?
It's possible, but when he was interviewed, he knew that he was dying of cancer. These are the interviews that he gave afterward. You know, This is decades after the event actually happened. So then I started looking at the yearbook, 1947 Roswell Army Airfield Yearbook, and I'm good friends with Tom Carey. Don Schmidt and Tom Carey are pretty much the last of the surviving original witnesses, not witnesses, but actual researchers that were digging up all the witnesses.
And they're based out of that area?
One is in Pennsylvania and one is in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And they wrote multiple books about this, but what we're doing here is we're showing the yearbook from 1947, and we want to zoom in on this guy right here, Sergeant William W. Bud Taylor. He's a first-hand military witness who looked inside the craft, inside the escape pod. And Sergeant William Bud Taylor, this is a little bit of a blow up here, and I want to go over what he had talked about. Eyewitness testimony from a 509th Bomb Group member who looked inside the Roswell escape pod. Sergeant William Bud Taylor. The craft, Taylor said, seemed like it could have been from Earth, only from our future, which I thought was interesting. Certain areas of the interior of the craft were entwined with a network of strange plastic-like fibers or filaments, like fiber optics.
Yes.
Okay? The interior was also outfitted with embedded flat screens or display panels. An ethereal violet or pink-purple color was incorporated into some of the materials construction of the craft. Some of the craft structure was embossed with unusual hieroglyphic-like symbols that he described as being somewhat like Asian writing. There were bodies. Some small corpses were found that he described as being like humans. So we've got the hieroglyphic writing, we've got this violent purple hue, we've got the fiber optic cables, we've got the flat screen monitors. And so now you can see that was this technology trickle down to the defense industry and then later into the privatized industry? Is that where we're getting a lot of the technology?
Oh, yeah.
Something that we should consider. But this is from a first-hand military source who was on the site, who actually looked inside. So we did a rendering of what it may have looked like inside. And so I said, Rudy, give me the interior of this craft. I need some flat screen monitors. Give me the fiber optics. I need the hieroglyphic type writing. And so this was our first pass illustration to give an idea. Now, we originally thought that the bodies were inside. Turns out they weren't. They were actually completely ejected from the interior of the craft. And one was still alive. He was walking. He was the survivor. So we had to do a revision to this version, and we came up with this. This, I believe, is probably the most accurate we're going to see of the interior of the Roswell spacecraft. There was a horizontal hull breach. We've got the fiber optics. We've got the flat screen monitors. We've got this hieroglyphic type symbols on the inside here. And this is kind of this curved interior egg-shaped wall that we're looking at here.
Boy, you would almost think you're looking at a computer chip.
In a way, yeah, it's kind of got that look. It's kind of got that integrated circuit look here.
Yep.
So is this guy who he said he was? So I had to do some additional digging here. El Paso Times, May 9th, 1985. Services for W.F. Bud Taylor of 87 of Roswell. Checks out, yes, confirmed. This is the guy.
Wow.
So this is a real guy, 509th Bomb. He was stationed there. This is the real guy. He's the same guy, which was in the yearbook from 1947. So we've confirmed it's our same guy here. Now, two people we want to talk about here that saw the spacecraft. Ernst Steinhoff. He was number 2 under Operation Paperclip. He was like Werner von Braun was 1. This gentleman was number 2. Now we want to consider what he had to say here. Ernst Steinhoff, the Roswell craft was not extraterrestrial, it was extra-dimensional. That's the first thing. Second thing we want to consider is this gentleman right here off to the left sitting. U.S. Navy Commander George W. Hoover seated left. What did he have to say? Because he was clued in on this. The Roswell visitors were not extraterrestrial, but actually extratemporal or from our future. So this is kind of the, I wouldn't say totally new understanding of Roswell, but it appears that they're from our future.
Interesting.
Yep.
Isn't that something?
That's what we could be dealing with here.
Wow, just fascinating.
Because this is what Bud Taylor, he said it looked modern, but it looked like it could have been from our future. He didn't say it was completely ET or alien.
So this crash, we've heard many, many times. I've heard it growing up many, many times. I've never been to Roswell. It's on my bucket list. So this takes place literally over 7 days. This isn't a 1-2 day event. This is about a 7-day event that unfolds here because the crash takes place,
right,
and then a couple cowboys find it, and they go back to the local bar, and then everybody hears about it, and they go out, and everybody's trying to grab stuff, take pictures, and all that. I know you're going to, do you have more to talk about?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
The point being is that the bodies and the craft were laying out on the plains for days before anyone got involved.
Just extraordinary.
So we'll continue on here. So here's interesting. This is an interesting point. According to Don Schmidt, they did not have a crane at the base at the time. So they had to hire an independent contractor from downtown Roswell who drove all the way to the crash site. They had a lanyard device. They hoisted the craft onto the back of the 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy, covered it up with tarps, and then shipped it to the base. So that's essentially what went down here. Here's our full color rendering by Joel Payne. I want to give him credit. Gives you an idea what this may have looked like if we could be there back in 1947. This is all good. Wouldn't it be great to go back in time and see all this going on?
So this craft didn't take as much damage as the exterior one.
Yes,
okay,
correct.
So this one
That's
stayed
correct.
intact.
This was the escape pod, we believe.
All right,
Yes.
And so okay, this is something else.
Yep,
Okay.
this is the escape pod. Okay, so now we're at July 8th, 1947, where we've got two paper boys. We've got multiple eyewitnesses that saw a military convoy drive down Main Street, which you could do today. If you want to do this road trip someday, we'll do this field trip. I'll take you right down Main Street. We'll do the exact same route that these guys took. So we've got two paper boys, multiple witnesses, plus or minus 5 minutes from 4 p.m. We know that from the witnesses. We know exactly when this thing came down, right through the convoy. And we've got two Jeeps up front. We've got an 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy that had a tarped egg-shaped craft, and then two Jeeps in back of them heading toward the base. So this is July 8th, 1947.
Oh, I mean, unbelievable. What a moment. You're a paper boy, a young kid. You're sitting on the street going, what is happening here? Like, what's going on? Could you imagine seeing that?
Of course. Not only him, but all people in the town saw this. I mean, there's no way of hiding a convoy going down Main Street, Roswell. There's just no way of hiding it.
It's almost like they want to show it off. Like, look what we have, everybody. Like, how they're the military. Why wouldn't they go a different direction? Why did they go straight through downtown?
I guess that was the best way to go. That's the best way. I mean,
interesting. Okay.
And here again, this is over a weather balloon now, as we're told. Okay.
Yeah.
Why would you have an 18-wheeler tarping a weather balloon? It doesn't make any sense at all. So let's continue on here. So Roswell Daily Record, July 8th, 1947, and here is what they originally said, right? Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. July 8th, 1947. Less than a day later, they came back with another report. July 9th, 1947, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. Ramey says excitement is not justified. General Ramey says disc is weather balloon. So under 24 hours later, they completely changed their tune. Completely changed their tune.
Wow. How'd you like to be known as that guy that changed the story when, you know, how many years later we're like, what were you thinking? I mean,
that's how it went down. So obviously they started figuring out what they were dealing with here, and they put clamps on this thing.
Sure.
And it's kind of been that way ever since.
Sure.
I mean,
47's an important time in our timeline because we're just got out of a war.
Correct.
And we got issues with Russia. Now
Correct.
we have something that could provide us new technology, and we've got to change the story globally. Because
well done.
This went global.
Oh, it did.
Yeah,
They
right.
got called from London. They got calls.
Okay. Yeah, and they're getting calls from London, and coming into 48, you have the London's hosting the Olympics. Truman has just finished segregation of, you know, all that stuff's going on. So right before all that hits, you've got this whole incident with, we have our real first down captured witness, multiple witness. It's not like 41. This is in 47. Now we have hundreds of people that witness this. How do you keep control of it is now what the government's dealing with.
Right, that's right.
Okay.
Very well done, very well done. We'll continue on. So as the convoy is making its way toward Roswell Army Airfield, they go into hangar P3 Building 84 at the base. This is July 8th, 1947, somewhere around 4:15 p.m. And so what you see in this illustration is the 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy with the escape pod. Off to the left, you see the child-sized caskets that were talked about by Glenn Dennis, who's the town mortician. In the foreground, kind of in the center here, we've got 4 ET bodies on the hangar floor. One body had already been flown out because this is a rushed thing. There's lots of things converging at the same time. One of the bodies has already flown out by Pappy Henderson in a C-54 directly to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. So that's why we don't have that, but this has already been sent out. Now, while all this is going on, they are building a large wooden crate in the back of the hangar. When the crate is done, they load all the child-sized caskets into the crate, seal the crate, and then take the crate to a very interesting area. That's where we're going to go next here. I'm going to continue on. So what I want to do now is I want to take you for a tour of this hangar, which still exists today. If you call the maintenance personnel representative, you can get access to this hangar. You can go here today.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm going to take you inside this hangar. So this is P3 Building 84. This is the exterior. This is the other reverse viewing angle of it. They do aircraft maintenance here, commercial airliners. They do scrapping here. They've got storage for airliners. Elvis's jet was purchased from this area, which is now going to Oshkosh as we speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's on its
cool.
way to Oshkosh right now. It's been
Really?
turned into an RV, and it's on its way to Oshkosh right now.
Oh, that's neat.
But prior to that, it was sitting at this base for 35 years. So let's continue on here. Now we're getting into the hangar now. I'm going to take you inside the hangar, and this is what it looks like when you get inside. These steel rafters, they're all original. This building was only supposed to be here for like 10 years. It still exists today.
Wow.
So here you can see this is where the crate was built. Off to the right is where the 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy. In the foreground to the left, that would be where the child-sized caskets were. A little bit of a different view here. And then what I want to do now is I want to take you what I believe to be plus or minus 6 inches to where the bodies were laid down on the hangar floor. That's where I want to take you now. So now we're heading kind of in that direction. When we move on to the next slide, we're going to go to where I believe they actually laid down the bodies, and that's this location here. So when you stand at this seam in the concrete floor, you get this feeling.
Really?
It's a little bit otherworldly because this is where we believe they laid the bodies down. Yes.
Wow, that's interesting.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So you really feel like obviously you have been there.
Yeah.
You felt something.
You can
like,
well.
It's a little spooky, creepy. Is it?
It gives you could this be real? Yeah. I mean, are they just lying to us, or is this actually real? If you read Tom Carey and Don Schmidt's book, Witness to Roswell, which is literally the best book in Roswell, they call it Witness to Roswell because they have the eyewitness testimony from the first-hand 509th Bomb Group members that were there and saw it. It's all of their testimony within this book. And when you put that book down, I'll guarantee you'll think it's not a weather balloon. That's for sure. So here's the location. I don't know, give it plus or minus a foot to where we believe the bodies were laid down. Okay, moving on. So once the crate was built, they moved the crate with the bodies into atomic bomb pit number 1. They lowered this crate into the atomic bomb pit, which usually had an atomic bomb there, but in this case, it has something far more important, far more historically significant. Once it was lowered into the atomic bomb pit, they had 2 perimeter screens, which you've seen on my SolidWorks model here, 2 perimeter screens with MPs with rifles posted inside and out with orders to shoot to kill anyone who tried to breach the exterior perimeter of these screens.
Who's going to try to breach this?
For a weather balloon, right?
Yeah. I mean,
anybody who would come up to the base to try to get inside. They were going to shoot these people, no questions asked.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the goal. That was the mandate that these guys had. And they had people posted inside and out of both concentric rings.
Now, are you about to tell us stories about the 2 guys that were posted up on this? Like, did they give testimony? Did their families talk about what Grandpa saw?
This gets into the permeating odor that was coming from the crate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you still have that.
Oh, yeah. That's because this thing was stored off in the distance before the B-29 came over there. And it was just so bad because you got rotting corpses here. And they had already been sitting out there for days. Wow. By the time they got there, it just permeated everything these guys were wearing. And they had burned all the clothes. So that's all part of the account here. Let's go on to the next one. So what they did is they had a B-29 called Straight Flush, which is the 2nd most historic aircraft in the United States, right behind the Wright Flyer. You could make an argument this was the most historic aircraft because it transported the bodies. So they taxied over the bomb pit. They open up the cargo bay bomb doors. They have a hydraulic lift that lifts the crate into the bomb bay doors. They close this, and then they fly it to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas, is where they flew the bodies and parts of the debris.
And what are your thoughts on that? Why that military base with this instead of
Because
going
that's where
right?
General Ramey was. That was where General Ramey. He wanted to see this. He called up William Blanchard and said, "I want some of this debris right now. Get me some of this now." So they just
I'll
shipped
send
it
you
over there.
something.
It later made its way over to right field, but it made an interim stop at 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. Yep.
Interesting.
Continuing on. So here is B-29 straight flush. It was scrapped in 1954. The most historic aircraft gone. I don't know why they would do that.
So there's nothing left of it.
No, there's nothing left. All we have left are models now. So if you go to the Air Center, which you can go to today, when you land at Roswell, this is where you land. You can get off, you can see this model display at the Roswell Air Center. This is all we have left of straight flush is a scale model of the most historic aircraft in the world that transported the bodies.
Incredible.
Gone now, right? Here's the...
Do you think that was intentional, Michael? Do you think that they wanted to get rid of any possible evidence linked to that? So they think, hey, we need to make sure this plane...
It could very well be.
Interesting.
It could very... This is the nose art for straight flush. The other one body was flown by Oliver Pappy Henderson. He was directly to right field, Dayton, Ohio. Do not pass go, do not go around the board. He was flown directly to right field, Dayton, Ohio.
Wow.
Believed to be one body and small parts of debris.
And what's the date and what's the timing on that?
Right around the same time frame, July 8th, 1947.
Okay.
Because there were multiple things converging at the same time, and there was a lot of chaos going on. They had to build the crate. They had to load the crate, get that thing out of here. A lot of these flights were flown below pressurization level because you had biological materials, so they were keeping that in mind. That was talked about. When they landed at Fort Worth, Texas, there was a mortician that met them there. And when they left, one of the crew members said, "Boys, we just made history," because they transported the bodies. So
Sure.
we had church people were involved. But bottom line is we had multiple things converging. It was kind of rushed in the beginning. They had to get that stuff secure. They didn't want this just rotting out in the desert. They had to do something. All right, so let's continue on here. Here's the drawing by Rudy that shows you Pappy Henderson overseeing the loading of one of the bodies. He's pilot in command. He needs to know what's on his aircraft.
Sure.
And so he's an American hero, World War II, and his wife, Sappho Henderson, learned about this when they were at the supermarket checkout counter, and they had this thing, Roswell debris and bodies sent to right field. And, she originally thought, I don't know what this is. And she said, and her husband said, "Well, I can tell you now about this story because I'm seeing it in the checkout. And I can tell you because I'm the pilot that flew the bodies."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she got a real interesting...
So cook me something good tonight.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, let's continue. We believe there was a rudimentary type autopsy at the base hangar that I showed you in the beginning, and then later a much more involved autopsy sometime after July 9th, 1947 at the Aeromedical Lab, right field, Dayton, Ohio. Yes.
So where is this taking place right now? So this is
This is at the Aeromedical Lab, right field, Dayton, Ohio.
Okay, is this the one individual alien, or is it the other three? Are they all at this location now? Are all of them together? Do we know that?
Well, at least 2 to 3 bodies were flown in straight flush.
Right.
The survivor was later seen April 1948 at 1948 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The one that went from Pappy Henderson, he was also flown to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. So all roads lead to Rome.
Okay.
But when you talk about crash retrievals, all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base originally. So yes, this is Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio.
And you probably would miss all this because Truman is president at the time. He just ends racial segregation. So that's the big focus of the world, the U.S. So all this is happening, you could miss this. Like,
There's a lot of things he's juggling.
so
Yeah.
how much does the public know about what's happening here?
It didn't become public until 77 time frame when Jesse Marcel Sr. started coming forward, right in that time frame.
Isn't
It
that
didn't.
something?
It was kept under wraps for decades
Incredible.
because the government said it was a weather balloon, and people trusted the government. They didn't question it. If the government said it was a weather balloon, it was a weather balloon.
Isn't that something?
So that's what we were told. Let's continue on here. Now, that's why I want to introduce everyone to this gentleman, Marion Black Mac Magruder. He was deployed to England in 1943 to learn about night fighting. He came back and taught Americans how to do night fighting. Prior to that, they didn't know. So they had to send this guy over there. He came back and then taught our pilots how to do night flying. Here is the Lexington Herald, August 9th, 1945. Colonel Magruder was one of 5 Marine pilots selected in 1942 to go to England and study night fighting technique. So this is just paperwork to back up his. He was an ace pilot in World War II, night fighting, went to England, learned, came back here. So this is just kind of a reference slide to give people an idea of who this guy was. Very decorated pilot, very famous pilot. So I got a hold of his brother, his son, Mark Magruder, lives in Phoenix. I did a 3-hour videotape interview with Mark Magruder, and he laid out everything his father told him about what he had seen at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in April 1948. I got to see his awards, his induction into the Aviation Hall of Fame, all his medals. He absolutely is who he said he is, a credible witness. This is not just some airy-fairy guy. This is a credible first-hand military witness. Let's go on here. So here's his Aviation Hall of Fame in Kentucky, the medallions that they gave him. I've got the awards here at the bottom, all his awards. So this is a legitimate guy here. Now, that takes us to this. This is Air War College, class of 1947, 1948. So you had these ace pilots that were at Montgomery Field. This is April 1948. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this shows you a document that I got from Mark Magruder, one of his sons. It says, Study History, Air War College 47-48. This is the cover page. And if you go into here, it says Air University, Air War College, Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama. So that's where they were stationed back in 48 time frame. If we go one more slide, now you can see how this all ties in. Because look at the field trip they had, and look at where they went. Field trip to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. In other words, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So if we go to the next slide, here you see Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So bottom line is, April 1948, they were stationed in Montgomery. They got a mysterious call from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Gentlemen, we need to get your opinion on something. Come fly over here immediately. So they had a plane pick up all these guys. They flew them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because they wanted to get their opinion on something urgent. All these military pilots are brought into this large open room. 2 guys come in with a cardboard box. They start handing out debris to all these pilots. It's debris from the Roswell craft and all the crash debris. They wanted to get their opinion. Could our top military pilots handle this new reality? It was a trial balloon. Could they accept this new reality? And they were told this is from the Roswell crash. Now, when that was done, all the debris was collected back into the cardboard boxes. They were led down a long corridor. They made a left-hand turn into a large open room with a one-way mirror, and they were shown the survivor. They were shown the survivor. This is April 1948 through a one-way mirror. He was described as Casper the Ghost looking. He was not green. He was kind of a grayish white color. 3.5 to 4 feet tall, oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, emaciated body, muscular tone, emaciated, hands that went down below the knees. And they saw the dead ET corpses as well. So not only did Marion Black Mac Magruder saw the survivor, but they also saw the other corpses as well.
Interesting. Wow, can you imagine? That is something.
Yep. So let's continue on here. Now, Mark Magruder gave me all of his private notes that his father had told him. I looked through all the notes, and this is the takeaway, take-home quote here. This is from Marion Black Mac Magruder. Quote, "They all think the bodies are at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but they are at Eglin Air Force Base in vast underground cold storage vaults there." So if anyone wants to know where the bodies were at that time, Eglin Air Force Base.
Interesting. Just something. I mean, that is quite some stories to hand down to your son.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That ends up sharing them with you and giving you all this information. That's incredible.
Mhm.
I don't know. What is this now? 1948. This is all taking place.
This would be,
This is almost a year after the
Yep.
crash at Roswell.
1948, and that takes us right into March 25th, 1948, Aztec, New Mexico, which, according to Stanton Friedman, more blood, sweat, tears, and research, I'm going to go to the next slide here, was done by Scott and Suzanne Ramsey that anyone had ever done on Roswell. So Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, they get credit for tracking down the witnesses, writing the book, doing all the field work. They really need to be highlighted for great researchers as they are.
Yeah, they spent how many years of their life and thousands of
A
documents.
huge amount of time had gone into this. So let's kind of talk about this case. So this is about 14 miles northeast of Aztec, New Mexico. Here's the base. This shows you X marks the spot where this craft came down. And we'll go to the next slide here. Now, this craft was highly polished mirror reflective exterior. It was 99.9 feet in diameter, had a low-rise dome on top. There were porthole windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the low-rise
Did you say
dome.
99 feet?
99.9 feet in diameter, just shy of 100 feet in diameter.
That's a big craft.
Absolutely.
That is huge.
Absolutely.
But very sleek. in
Very
design.
sleek. Yes.
Okay. All
Very
right.
sleek in design. So this is my AutoCAD drawing that shows you what this craft looked like based on the eyewitness testimony. Now, it was the oil field workers that got to the scene before the military. They didn't know what they were looking at. I mean, a helicopter was new back then. This is 1948 time frame. So when they got here, these are the oil field workers. They climbed up on the rim of this thing and walked toward the dome. They're looking through these windows. And so that's what we've got here. We'll go on to the next
I
slide.
don't know if I'm going to just walk up on a, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, it's curious.
Yeah, apparently they were very curious and go, hey, let's go up there, see what this is. I don't know if I could do that.
Well, I mean, this is
It's
something
huge,
that you would.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you're saying that in its impact, it ended up landing pretty much level.
There was a tilt to it.
Okay,
There was a
little
tilt to
Okay,
it.
so they walk up, and
So
what
they
happens?
walk up and they walk along the rim of the disc all the way to the low-rise dome where the porthole window is, and guess what they found?
I would not say a chocolate shake.
They found a quarter-size hole in one of the windows.
Oh, this is interesting.
And they said, you know what? What are we going to do about this? So they walked back to their utility truck. These are oil field workers, not military, civilian oil field workers. They got a pole from the back of their utility truck, climbed back on the rim of the disc, walk all the way back to the dome. They took that pole and stuck it right through that quarter-size crack hole in the windshield or in the porthole window, and they were jiggling it around. And they activated a device that opened up an entryway hatchway at the bottom of the craft.
Isn't that something?
They got inside the craft.
What are the chances of
Yep.
that?
Yep. That's how it went down. So I'm going to go to the
So
next
this
slide.
is factual. This is someone.
This is, well, Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, they interviewed the last of the surviving oil field workers. They're the only ones who did it.
Okay.
Nobody picked up this case because they thought it was all a hoax. It wasn't until Scott and Suzanne Ramsey really got involved and started interviewing. They're all gone now. All the 509th Bomb Group members from Roswell are gone. Anyone from Aztec, they're all gone. So that's why it's important for us to track down these legacy witnesses to get to the last of the surviving guys before it's all over.
Sure, because
know?
these down crafts impact all of us.
Correct.
In one way or another.
Correct.
The technology that's coming from
That's
them
right.
affects what we have today.
It could change the world.
Yeah, so it's important
change
that we
the world.
know the foundation
Yes.
where all this came from. Okay.
Yes, correct. So we'll go to the next slide here. And when they got inside the upper dome, they saw two ET bodies slumped over on consoles and on chairs. They said they were wearing a one-piece, tight-fitting blue flight suit. There was violet-colored writing on the inside wall of the craft. There was a display panel. There were definitely buttons and switches that had iconology as well. So this is the second time now that we've heard of these violet or purple-colored lettering on the inside of the craft itself. All right, now we're going to move on to the next slide. By now, the military gets involved. They order all the oil field workers to get out of the area immediately.
Do we know, Michael, how much time has elapsed from the moment of the crash? The guys get up on the spaceship. Now the military's there.
I believe it's a matter of hours.
Okay.
It's not too long.
Okay.
This is something that, they're tracking this.
Because once again, Roswell Air Force Base is not too far away.
Not too far away.
Okay.
But,
how do you think they get word of this?
they're tracking this stuff on radar.
Okay.
They know where it's coming down.
So this one's a little different from what we know at Roswell. This